The Overwatch Archives are open today, featuring the Uprising mission we played this time last year and the new Retribution mission, which tells the story of Blackwatch, the secret organisation within Overwatch led by Reyes, aka Reaper. It's good stuff, and if you want to see us play it, there's another video that's gone live alongside this one, so go check that out. But whilst I was visiting Blizzard to take a look at Retribution, this PvE experience, I wanted to talk to the Overwatch team about what kind of plans they have for content like this going forwards. Should we be expecting something more substantial later down the line, a full campaign or perhaps some kind of PvE progression system? I sat down with game director Jeff Kaplan and designer Adrian Fino, who's been working on Retribution specifically. I feel kind of bad about this because most of my questions in this interview, Adrian couldn't really answer. I spoke to him afterwards and he seemed like a lovely guy. Sorry about that, Adrian. Okay, with that being said, let's start off with the vision for Overwatch Archives. What is it going to be?
Sure. Archives, we hope, encompasses events that can take place in Overwatch history that players have always wanted to see firsthand and that they get to see by playing those missions directly. So our first event was Uprising, which took place back in Kings Row when it was like Tracer's first mission, which we thought was a really cool mission. And what was funny is originally last year when we were going to call the event Overwatch Archives featuring the Uprising mission, we're like, well, why don't we just call it Uprising since it's the only thing that we have right now? If you went back and looked, it actually said Archives on the loot box even, and we never used that. So this time around, we're like, okay, finally we have two things, so we can call it Archives. And so now we have Retribution, which actually took place before Uprising, and it's the Blackwatch story where they go in and they uncover a Talon agent, and you see a moment that happens that's sort of Reyes' transformation, and it's the first time that Blackwatch is in the public eye, and you'll see that mission play out. And then we also have room for Uprising, which a lot of people didn't get to enjoy last year, so they'll get to see this year.
If you do want to play either Retribution or Uprising, you'll only be able to do that up until the end of April, until presumably the event resets next year. Why is that the case? Why not keep running it all year round?
You want to talk about that? Or?
I don't. I think
okay,
I think you should.
I like Adrian's answer.
Yeah.
So it gets asked a lot, how come Uprising doesn't last, just have it stay year round, or how come Retribution isn't going to stay year round? And first of all, it's something we always consider. So I always like to say never. At one point I said there will never be deathmatch in Overwatch, and then deathmatch is one of my favorite modes in Overwatch. So if I've done one thing right, it's been wrong a lot.
Yep.
Yeah,
Really good at being wrong.
I'm super good at being wrong at this point. So the reason right now that we don't run Uprising and Retribution year round is they're really fun. I think they're really good PvE events. I don't know if they have the long-term replayability that players would expect out of them, out of a AAA experience. I think to make something truly replayable and AAA, you need a lot more content. You probably need some sort of progression system to go with it, some sort of incentive to go with it. And that's currently lacking in Retribution or Uprising. I think when they're there for a short time, they're fun and they're replayable through things like All Heroes mode. Retribution adds a lot more variance that we didn't have in Uprising. Trying to beat the modes on different difficulties, like beating this one on Legendary is quite a challenge, but it's really fun to keep trying at. But I wouldn't say that's hundreds of hours of replayability. I would say that's more, tens of hours.
Around 20 days.
Around 20 days. Yeah, it lasts until it'll take you to April 30th to really enjoy the content, and then you'll enjoy the break after that.
Prior to this interview, I was told it took roughly a full year for the Overwatch team to create this Retribution mission and the accompanying map, Rialto, that will release a little bit later down the line. With that being considered, and here's the big question, does this mean it's unlikely that we'll ever see a more substantial PvE mode in Overwatch, like a campaign, for example?
Well, when we conceived of Overwatch, it's really intended to be a PvP experience. That's the core of what we focus on. And we put a tremendous amount of effort towards the sort of competitive integrity of the experience. So our main focus for Overwatch is PvP and a competitive game. With that in mind, it leaves us some time, but not as much time as it would take to do a really heavy PvE experience. And I like to think that the core of our audience, we have a lot of players, over 35 million players, are here because they love the PvP experience that we're providing them. With that said, the team has a lot of fun making PvE experiences. We want to bring more story to the game, and PvE experiences let us do that. PvE challenge is something that's very familiar to us at Blizzard. We love to have things like, if you think of StarCraft campaign on its most difficult modes, or WoW raiding, like World of Warcraft raiding is a great example of PvE challenge. Those are things that we love making and we love playing. Oftentimes it gets asked of us, well, why don't you guys just, stop doing this other stuff and just make the PvE campaign for the game? We would love to, and that's very compelling to us when we think about it, but that's probably like making a brand new game for us. Like, that's a significant amount of work that I'm not sure our fans realize that it would constitute making a brand new game. Whether or not we should be making that game, I think that's a great question, and that's something, we'll continue to take feedback and talk with one another about.
But for now, are the team happy with the split between PvE and PvP content in Overwatch?
Well, I wish we could do more of everything for everyone.
Yeah.
I think Retribution is a great example of using the opportunities very smartly. Like, we knew when we built Retribution, we were building a PvE-specific event. But when we made the map, we made this beautiful Rialto map, we said, well, is there a way we can make it work for PvE and PvP? And I think players will be very interested when they see it. You've gotten to play, right? So one thing that's really interesting is the beginning and end of the PvE mission, that part of Rialto only exists in the PvE part.
Okay.
In the PvP map, that beginning and end aren't there, and there's a brand new ending to the PvP section. So I think Retribution is kind of a good example of sometimes we can have our cake and eat it too. Like, we can devote a lot of development resources to something that's, while it might seem primarily PvE, our PvP players will get something really great out of it too. And I think those are the types of opportunities that we're going to be looking for on the Overwatch team.
Okay, let's focus on Archives then. Will it always be about backstories, as the name suggests?
I think when we conceived of it, yeah, definitely, we thought this is a great way to tell backstory, but we're super open-minded. Like, I can imagine the version which is like, hey, here's a present-day thing. Going in the future, that feels weird to me. Like, I'd rather earn that the hard way by like carrying forth the plot to get us there. But right now, I could see something happening in the present, and I could definitely see more incidents in the past.
I think the Overwatch lore presents an interesting challenge in that the game takes place in a modern era, but a lot of the storytelling in this game is about looking back into its past. Is that stuff all mapped out, and do the team know exactly which stories are left to tell before they can push forwards the modern era side of things more significantly?
It's pretty mapped out, but to be honest, like, I would say we're extremely I'm extremely flattered by the criticism when we get it. When people say, we know everything about the backstory, just push the story forward. It's pretty awesome because it means people are listening and people are paying attention and they care. We tend to, having worked on Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, and these franchises that have really been around for sort of decades, we tend to think of Overwatch as very new, and that there's a lot about the story that people don't know yet. Using Retribution as an example, it's like how many people knew that Blackwatch was a subset of Overwatch, and that Reyes, who was actually a pretty decent dude, he was actually a pretty good guy, kind of had this turn into darkness, and it seemed very interesting to us, like, don't you want to see that turn into darkness happen? Even though we've mentioned it before, like, oh, at one time there was Reyes, now he's Reaper, let's get on with the news story, and like, come on, let's hear about it. But to us, it's very interesting to show, how that transformation happened. And then ultimately, like, this Retribution event is the start of the downturn of Overwatch to where they're going to eventually fall into controversy and get dissolved. And we feel like that's an important enough story for us to spend time on and not just rush forward and say, take our word for it, like, bad stuff happened, but let's get to the good stuff. Like, we think all of it's the good stuff.
And finally, as a follow-on to that last question, the cancellation of the First Strike graphic novel has some fans worried that the Overwatch storyline is actually a bit up in the air right now. Is there any truth to that? And if not, why was the graphic novel cancelled so close to its completion?
I think I have to answer this
You
one.
must.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking.
No.
If you
please.
had deep gameplay questions, he's your man.
But there was more.
No, the cancellation of First Strike didn't change the storyline at all. We have very specific eras of Overwatch history. You know, there's pre all of it. There's the Omnic Crisis, when the nations were fighting the Omnics on their own before they had banded together. First Strike is the first time that they put Overwatch units together, where you had a Crusader from the Germans, you had the 2 American super soldiers that were put together, you had Torbjorn. That was really like that First Strike era. Then we have what's called the gold, like First Strike is also what solved the Omnic Crisis, beat it. Then we have what's called the Golden Era, and this is where you start to introduce characters like Genji and Mercy. Tracer makes her appearance. Tracer and Winston are actually the last new recruit class of the Golden Era. Then you have the fall of Overwatch. And what we're living in now is that recall era, where Overwatch has been disbanded. Winston has set the recall in motion, and through animated shorts like Rise and Shine and Honor and Glory, you're starting to see who's responding to the recall and in which way. So the major plot has not changed at all. I think how those different eras are told, we want to just be really careful. We know we're setting canon. We want it to be really good. We want it to be a strong foundation. Hopefully we set a foundation that builds a creative legacy far beyond when we're working on Overwatch, and other more brilliant minds are taking the franchise in a different direction.
Sure, so you felt like First Strike just wasn't quite...
It wasn't. I feel like the First Strike wasn't the perfect telling of the First Strike era that we wanted to do. We still need to do the telling of the First Strike era.
Yeah.
We need our execution to be 100%.
All right, I'll do it. Thank you so much to Jeff and Adrian, especially Adrian. God, I'm sorry. If you do want to see the Retribution mission in action, here is a link to that video in which we play through a full run. Johnny and I talk over it and explain what's going on if you'd like to watch that. If not, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.